darkness inside the helicopter was thick, like oil. I sat on the edge of the open bay door, my legs dangling over 1,000 miles of black jungle. The wind whipped at my boots, smelling of rain and wet earth. My headset crackled with static, the only sound in my ears besides the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the rotor blades above. We were flying low, dangerously low, skimming the treetops of the Congo to avoid radar detection. The vibration rattled my teeth, shaking my bones with every turn. This wasn't a sanctioned military operation. We didn't exist. If we crashed, no one was coming to save us. We were ghosts in a machine, expendable assets for a corporation that cared more about profit margins than human lives. I looked at my team. Across from me sat Ox, a giant of a man carrying a heavy machine gun that looked like a toy in his massive hands. His face was a mask of stoic calm, but his knuckles were white. Next to him was Echo, our sniper, cleaning his scope with a calm precision that unsettled me. Then there was Bishop, the tech guy, nervously tapping his foot against the metal floor. We were mercenaries, paid a fortune to do a job the government wouldn't touch. Our mission was simple: recover a crashed drone in the Ituri Forest. But as I looked down at the endless ocean of trees below, I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. It was a cold, hard lump of instinct warning me to turn back. I had been on 100 missions before. I had fought in deserts, cities, and snow. But this felt different. The air felt heavy, charged with a silent electricity. It felt like we were flying into the mouth of a sleeping beast, and we were about to wake it up. I checked my rifle one last time, sliding the bolt back to ensure a round was chambered. 1 minute to drop, the pilot's voice buzzed, metallic and distant. Good luck, boys. You're gonna need it down there. We fast-roped down into a small clearing, our boots hitting the soft, muddy ground with a wet slap. The rope burned my gloves as I slid, and the moment my feet touched the earth, I unclipped and rolled into a crouch. The moment the helicopter pulled away, the silence hit us. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the silence in a room when everyone stops talking because a predator has walked in. The humidity was suffocating, instantly soaking our uniforms with sweat. The air was thick enough to chew, tasting of rot and ancient soil. This was the green hell, a place where nature fought you for every inch of ground. "Check in," I whispered, my voice amplified by our throat mics. "Ox's grain," the big man grunted, scanning the tree line, his eyes moving constantly behind his tactical goggles. "Echo is set," the sniper replied, his voice barely a breath, merging with the wind. "Bishop is up, tracking the signal now," the tech specialist said, staring at the glowing blue screen on his wrist, the light reflecting off his anxious face. "The crash site is 2 clicks north, rough terrain. We have a steep climb ahead." I nodded, engaging my night vision goggles. The world turned into a grainy wash of green and black shadows. Every vine looked like a snake, every bush looked like a crouching enemy. We moved out in a standard diamond formation, weapons raised. We were professionals. We were the best money could buy. But as we hacked our way through the dense undergrowth, swinging machetes at vines as thick as cables, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. It wasn't a feeling of being watched by a person. It was primal. It was the feeling a gazelle gets when the lion is already in the tall grass, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I moved slowly. The jungle floor was a mess of tangled roots and rotting vegetation that tried to trip us with every step. For an hour, we didn't speak. We just focused on the mission, listening to the squelch of our boots in the mud. But the deeper we went, the stranger things got. Usually, the jungle at night is loud. Insects buzz, frogs croak, monkeys scream. It's a symphony of life. But here, nothing. Not a single sound. It was dead quiet. Even the wind seemed afraid to move the leaves. It as if the forest itself was holding its breath in terror. "Boss," Bishop whispered, stopping in his tracks and holding up a fist. "I'm getting interference." "What kind?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the trees, watching for movement in the green static of my vision. It's rhythmic, like a pulse. It's messing with the drone's homing beacon." He tapped his screen frantically. "Wait, the signal just moved 50 meters to the east. And now it's moving back towards us, fast." We all dropped to a knee, weapons training on the darkness. A crashed drone doesn't move. Someone or something was dragging it. Or maybe they were carrying the transponder just to lure us in, like fish on a hook. "Eyes up," I ordered, my heart rate spiking. "Switch to thermal. If it has a heartbeat, I want to see it." We waited. Minutes felt like hours. Sweat dripped into my eyes. But on the thermal scopes, the jungle was cold. Nothing was out there. Or so we thought. We pushed forward, following the shifting signal, until we reached a small ravine carved into the earth. Down at the bottom, half buried in mud and smashed vines, was the drone. It looked like a giant broken insect. Smoke was still rising from its engine, curling up into the canopy like a ghostly finger. But something was wrong. The drone hadn't just crashed. It had been torn apart. The damage was catastrophic and deliberate. "Look at the wings," Ox said, pointing with his gloved hand. I moved closer, sliding down the muddy bank. The metal wings of the drone were shredded, not bent from impact, but ripped open from the outside. There were claw marks, deep, jagged gouges in the titanium alloy that curled the metal like paper. "What could do that?" Echo asked, kneeling to inspect the damage, tracing the grooves with a finger. "That's military-grade metal. You'd need a hydraulic press to tear it like that." I ran my hand over the marks. The edges were sharp. 3 distinct claws. "A bear?" Bishop suggested, his voice trembling as he looked into the dark woods. "No bear in the Congo," I said grimly, "and a leopard isn't strong enough to rip through titanium. This was pure brute force." I looked around the ravine. The mud was churned up, like a struggle had taken place. But there were no boot prints, no sign of rebels or poachers, just these massive, impossible claw marks and the overwhelming smell of ozone and wet dog. "Secure the drive," I commanded, checking my 6. "We grab the data and we get out. Fast. I don't like this place." While Bishop worked on extracting the hard drive from the wreckage, sparks flying as he pried the panel open, I did a perimeter check. That's when I found them. About 10 yards from the crash, hanging from a low branch, was a collection of bones. They weren't just scattered, they were tied together with thick vines to form a shape, a warning. It sung silently, a gruesome mobile for a monster's crib. I shined my light on it. It was a skull, a primate skull maybe, a chimp, lashed to a human femur. The bone was yellowed and old. "What is that?" Ox asked, coming up behind me, his weapon ready. "Totems," I said. "Local tribes use them to mark territory, to warn outsiders to stay away." "I've worked in this region for 10 years. I've never seen a tribe make knots like that. That's complex. That's sailor quality knot work." He was right. The knots were intricate, almost nautical. Whatever made this had dexterity. It had fingers. It had intelligence. "Hey, boss," Bishop called out from the drone. "I got the drive, but you need to hear this. It's messed up." I walked back to him. He had plugged his portable computer into the drone's black box. "The audio recording from right before the crash," Bishop said. "Listen." He pressed a key. A screech of metal filled the air, followed by the roar of the drone's engine straining. Then a sound that made my blood run cold. It wasn't an engine noise. It was a laugh. A deep, guttural, mocking laugh that sounded almost human, but far too wide. Ha 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 ha. Then the recording cut to static. "We are leaving, now," I said.
The mission parameters had just changed. We weren't dealing with a mechanical failure. We were dealing with a hostile force that could tear metal and laugh while doing it. We formed up, moving back the way we came. But the jungle had changed. The path we'd cut earlier seemed to have closed up. The vines were thicker, the shadows darker. It felt like the forest was shifting around us, trapping us inside. And then the smell hit us. It washed over us like a physical wave, thick and oily. It smelled of sulfur, rotting meat, and musk. It was so strong I had to cover my nose to keep from retching. "Arr!" Echo gagged, stumbling slightly. "What died? That's rancid." "Nothing died," Ox whispered, raising his heavy gun and flicking the safety off. "That's a scent gland. Animals use it to mark territory when they're angry, or when they are hunting." I checked the thermal scope again. Still nothing. But the smell was getting stronger, closer. It was surrounding us, pressing in from all sides. "They are masking," I realized, a cold sweat breaking out on my neck. "Whatever's out here, it's cold-blooded, or it knows how to hide its heat signature from our tech." "That's impossible," Bishop squeaked, clutching the data drive like a lifeline. "Move!" I ordered. "Double time. Get to the extraction zone. Watch the trees." We picked up the pace, boots splashing through the mud. But the feeling of being hunted was overwhelming now. I could feel eyes on my neck, hundreds of them. We were about a mile from the landing zone when the voice spoke. "Help me!" We all froze. We spun around, weapons raised, aiming into the void. The voice had come from the trees to our left. It was a human voice, a woman's voice. "Help, please, hurt." "Is there a civilian out here?" Bishop asked, lowering his rifle slightly, confusion warring with his training. "We have to check. We can't leave her." "Hold position," I hissed, scanning the darkness. "There are no civilians in this sector. It's a restricted zone. No one lives here." "But it sounds like she's dying," Bishop argued. He took a step toward the trees, drawn in by the plea. "Stop," I barked. "Help me, Bishop," the voice said. Bishop stopped dead. His face went pale, draining of all blood. It knows my name. How does it know my name?" "It's listening to our comms," Echo whispered, terror in his eyes. "It's mimicking us. It's recording us and playing it back." The voice changed. It dropped an octave, becoming a deep, rasping growl that vibrated in our chests. "Bishop, Bishop, meet." Then the laughter returned. It wasn't coming from one direction anymore. It was coming from all around us, high in the trees, low in the bushes. We were surrounded by a choir of madness. "Defensive circle, back to back," I yelled. We locked into position, facing outward, shoulders brushing. The jungle erupted with motion. The leaves shook violently, thrashing as if caught in a storm, but we still couldn't see them. They were moving too fast, blurs of shadow in the night vision that vanished before we could track them. Then a flare of light. Bishop panicked and popped a red distress flare. The sudden crimson light flooded the clearing, washing out our night vision, but revealing the nightmare in terrifying detail. There, standing behind a massive fern, was the creature. It stood on two legs, towering over 7 feet tall. It had the body of a bodybuilder, rippling with muscle and covered in patchy, matted fur. But the head? The head was a hyena, a massive, spotted hyena head with a crushed snout and jaw muscles that looked like steel traps. It smiled. Its lips pulled back to reveal black gums and yellow, serrated teeth dripping with saliva. Its eyes glowed in the red light of the flare, not the green of a wolf, but a burning, hateful amber. "Contact front!" I screamed, the adrenaline hitting me like a drug. "Open fire!" Ox opened up with a machine gun. Da-da-da-da-da. The sound was deafening, a jackhammer against the eardrums. Tracers zipped through the air, bright streaks of fire slamming into the creature's chest. I saw chunks of fur and flesh fly. The creature jerked back from the impact, but it didn't fall. Instead, it dropped to all fours and sprinted. It moved faster than anything I'd ever seen. It zigzagged through the gunfire, closing the distance in seconds, moving like a fluid shadow. "Right flank, there's another one!" Echo shouted, firing his sniper rifle from the hip, the boom of the heavy caliber echoing through the trees. I turned and fired my carbine. I hit the second beast in the shoulder. It grunted, stumbled, and then kept coming. These things were tanks. They were soaking up 5.56 rounds like they were bee stings. Their density was impossible. "Headshots," I roared. "Aim for the heads! Put them down!" But they were too fast. They were a blur of teeth and claws. The first one, the big alpha, leapt over a fallen log and landed 10 feet from us. It stood up again, roaring, a sound that was half laugh, half scream. It wasn't afraid of our guns, it was annoyed by them. It looked at us with pure contempt. The formation broke. Chaos took over. We had to move or die. "Fall back to the ridge," I ordered, firing blindly to keep them back. We started to retreat, stumbling over roots, firing as we went. Bishop was the slowest. He was weighed down with the tech gear and the heavy drone data. He was panting, lagging behind. "Wait! Cover me!" he screamed, his voice cracking with pure terror. I turned to provide suppressive fire, but I was too late. A third creature dropped from the trees above. It didn't make a sound. It landed directly on Bishop's back, flattening him into the mud with a wet thud. Bishop screamed, a high, shrill sound that cut through the gunfire. The creature didn't bite him immediately. It grabbed his leg with a hand that looked frighteningly human, dragged him into the darkness of the bush like a rag doll. "Help! Spectre! Help me!" His voice was cut off by a sickening crunch of bone. Then silence. "Bishop!" yelled Ox, stepping forward to charge after him, rage in his eyes. I grabbed Ox's harness and yanked him back with all my strength. "He's gone. If you go in there, you're dead too. Move. We can't save him." We ran. We abandoned stealth, abandoned protocol. We just sprinted through the dark jungle, branches whipping our faces, mud sucking at our boots like quicksand. My lungs burned as if I had inhaled fire. Behind us, the laughter grew louder. It was a chorus now, a pack. They were enjoying this. They were herding us, playing with their food before the kill. "They're flanking us," Echo shouted, checking his rear view while running. "They're running parallel to us in the trees. I can hear them." I checked my GPS. The river was a half-mile away. If we could cross the river, maybe the current would wash away our scent. Maybe they couldn't swim. It was a desperate hope, a fragile straw to clutch at, but that's all we had. "Keep moving," I gasped. "Don't stop for anything." Suddenly, a shadow swooped down from the left. I ducked just in time as a massive claw swiped the air where my head had been, the wind of the blow ruffling my hair. I fired blindly into the brush. I heard a yelp, distinct and animalistic. "I got one," I yelled. "They can bleed. They're not ghosts." "If it bleeds, we can kill it," Ox growled, racking the slide on his gun. But I could hear the fear in his voice. We were running out of ammo, and they were just getting started. We reached a small clearing of tall grass. We stopped for a split second to reload, hands shaking so badly I dropped a magazine. The jungle went silent again. No laughter, no movement, just the sound of our ragged breathing. Then, from the darkness, a voice spoke. "Spectre, help me!" It was Bishop's voice, perfectly replicated. It sounded wet, gurgling. "Boss," Ox whispered, his eyes wide. "Is he still alive? Did they leave him?" "No," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "That's not him. Bishop is dead." "Help me! Spectre! It hurts!" The voice sobbed. It sounded exactly like our friend in his final moments. It was coming from behind a large mahogany tree. "Come get me, boys!" Then the voice changed. It glitched like a broken record. It repeated, "Come get me," 3 times, speeding up till it turned into that manic, stuttering hyena laugh. It was a trap. They were using his voice to lure us in. "Don't listen to it," I said, my voice shaking. Focus on me. Eyes front. Block it out. It was the cruelest thing I had ever experienced. They weren't just animals hunting for food. They were sadists enjoying the psychological torture.
We burst out of the tree line and onto the muddy bank of the river. The water was black and fast-moving, swollen from recent rains. It looked like a ribbon of oil cutting through the jungle. "Cross, go," I ordered. We plunged into the water. It was freezing, shocking the breath out of me. The current tugged at our legs, trying to drag us under into the depths. We held our rifles high above our heads to keep them dry. Halfway across, the water was up to our chests. That's when they appeared on the bank we just left. 3 of them, then 4, then 5. They stood on the edge of the water, watching us. They didn't enter. They just paced back and forth, chattering to each other in low growls. Their eyes reflected the moonlight like demon lanterns. "They won't swim," Echo said, hope rising in his voice. "We're safe. They hate the water." We scrambled up the opposite bank, collapsing in the mud, gasping for air. I looked back. The creatures were still there, staring with those glowing amber eyes. The alpha, the biggest one, stepped forward. It looked at the water, then looked at me. It raised its head and let out a howl, a long, wavering sound that sounded like a tornado siren. It wasn't a howl of defeat. It was a signal. "Why aren't they following?" Ox asked, wringing out his shirt, shivering from the cold. "Maybe they can't swim," I said, though I didn't believe it. Nothing about these things suggested weakness. "Or maybe they don't need to," Echo said, pointing up with a trembling finger. I looked up. The trees on our side of the river were shaking. The canopy. The trees on both sides of the river touched high overhead, forming a natural bridge of interlocking branches and vines. "They're crossing in the trees," I realized, horror washing over me. Above us, dark shapes were leaping from branch to branch, clearing the river with impossible agility. They were dropping down onto our side, cutting off our escape. We weren't safe. We had just cornered ourselves against a sheer cliff face. "Defensive positions, against the rock wall," I shouted. We backed up until our spines hit the cold, unforgiving stone of the cliff. We had the river in front of us and the cliff behind us. We had nowhere left to run. We had to make our stand here, in the mud, in the dark. The first creature dropped from the canopy, landing with a heavy thud 10 feet away. Then another. They emerged from the shadows, closing the net. Ox stepped forward. He was the biggest man I knew, a towering figure of muscle and grit, but he looked small next to these monsters. "I'm almost dry on the saw," he grunted, checking his ammo belt. "I've got 1 belt left, 50 rounds maybe." "Make it count," I said, raising my rifle. "Short bursts." The alpha stepped into the light. It was massive, scarred, with 1 ear torn off. It looked at Ox and snarled, drool hanging from his jowls. Ox roared back, a primal sound of defiance. He pulled the trigger and the machine gun sang its song of death. The alpha took rounds to the chest and stumbled back, roaring in pain. The other creatures swarmed, trying to flank him. Ox swept the gun back and forth, cutting them down. For a moment I thought we might win. The sheer firepower was holding them back. Click! The gun went dry. The silence was deafening. Ox dropped the heavy weapon and drew his combat knife. "Come on, you ugly freaks!" he screamed. The alpha lunged. I fired my rifle, trying to cover Ox, but there were too many moving targets. The alpha slammed into Ox like a freight train, the impact audible even over the river. Ox slashed with his knife, burying it deep in the creature's neck, but the beast didn't care. It ignored the pain. It grabbed Ox by the shoulders and lifted him off the ground as if he weighed nothing. I will never forget the sound. The alpha bit down on Ox's shoulder and pulled. There was a snap, wet and loud. Ox went limp, his weapon falling from his hand. The creature threw him aside like a broken toy, tossing him into the brush. "Ox!" Echo screamed, losing his composure. He stood up, firing blindly, tears streaming down his face. "Echo, get down!" I yelled, grabbing his vest and pulling him behind a rock, just as a claw raked the stone where he had been standing. We were down to 2, just me and the sniper, and we had maybe 2 magazines of ammo left between us. The creatures were feasting on Ox. They were distracted by the fresh kill. "We have to move," I whispered to Echo. "While they're eating, it's our only chance." "I can't leave him," Echo sobbed. "He's gone," I said, grabbing his face and forcing him to look at me. "Move." We crawled along the base of the cliff, inch by inch, trying to be invisible. The sounds of feeding behind us were sickening. Snaps, tears, and wet crunches that made my stomach turn. About 50 yards down, I saw a crack in the rock face, a fissure hidden by vines. It was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. "In there," I signaled. We shimmied into the crack, scraping our skin against the rough stone. The air inside was cold and damp. We pushed ourselves deep into the darkness until the fissure opened up into a small, dry cave. We sat there in the pitch black, listening, trying to silence our breathing. Outside, the feasting stopped. Then came the sniffing, loud, wet sniffing sounds right at the entrance of the crack. A long, clawed hand reached in. It scraped against the stone, inches from my boot. The creature grunted, trying to force its massive shoulder in, but the gap was too small. It let out a frustrated roar that shook dust from the ceiling. We held our breath, praying they wouldn't dig, praying the rock would hold. We sat in that cave for hours. Echo was shaking uncontrollably, in deep shock. I checked my watch by the faint light of the tritium dial. 0400 hours. Dawn was 2 hours away. "Do you think they left?" Echo whispered, his voice tiny in the dark. "No," I said quietly. "They're waiting. They know we're in here. They have all the time in the world." "What are they?" Echo asked, gripping his rifle so hard his knuckles cracked. "They're not animals, Spectre. They laughed. They spoke Bishop's name. They planned this." "I don't know," I admitted. "Locals talk about spirits, the Bultingen, shapeshifters, were-hyenas. I always thought it was folklore, just stories to scare kids." "It's not folklore," Echo said, gripping his rifle so hard his knuckles cracked. "They're apex predators. We're not the top of the food chain here. We are just cattle." I checked the GPS again. The secondary extraction point is on top of this cliff. If we can climb out of this fissure on the other side, the helicopter can pick us up. "If we can climb," Echo said, looking at his shaking hands. "We have to try," I said. "We move at first light. We don't die in this hole." At 600 hours, gray light began to filter into the crack. The sniffing had stopped. "Let's go," I said. We shimmied deeper into the fissure, looking for a way up. The rock chimney narrowed, but there were jagged handholds. We slung our rifles and began to climb. It was a grueling ascent. My muscles burned from fatigue and my hands were raw and bleeding, but adrenaline kept me moving. We pulled ourselves up onto a ledge, about halfway up the cliff face. Below us, the jungle was a sea of mist, beautiful and deadly. "Look," Echo whispered, pointing down. At the base of the cliff, they were waiting. 5 of them. They were sitting on their haunches, looking up at us. They knew exactly where we were. They'd been watching the exit. The alpha saw us. It didn't roar. It just stood up and started to climb. It dug its claws into the rock, pulling its massive bulk up the vertical wall with terrifying speed. It climbed like a spider. "Move! Move!" I screamed, scrambling for the next hold. We scrambled up the remaining 50 feet of rock, tearing our fingernails, desperate to reach the top before the beast caught us.
I rolled over the edge of the cliff and onto the grassy plateau at the top. The grass was wet with dew. I reached down and grabbed Echo's hand, hauling him up just as a claw swiped at his boot, missing by an inch. We were on top. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long shadows. I grabbed my radio. "Spectre to base! Spectre to base! Emergency extraction! Hot! Hot! We are at Point Bravo!" Static. Then a bored voice answered.
Copy, Spectre. Bird is inbound. ETA 2 minutes.
2 minutes! I yelled to Echo. "We have to hold him for 2 minutes!" The Alpha crested the cliff. It pulled itself up, shaking dust from its fur. It looked at us, then at the open sky. It knew the chopper was coming. It knew it had a time limit. It charged. "Fire!" I shouted. We unloaded everything we had. My rifle clicked empty. I threw it aside and drew my sidearm, a .45 caliber pistol. The Alpha took hit after hit. It slowed down, limping, bleeding black blood, but it kept coming. It was 5 feet away. Echo stood his ground. He pulled the pin on a grenade. "For Ox," he whispered, his eyes finding peace. "Echo, no!" I screamed, reaching out for him. Echo didn't listen. He waited until the Alpha lunged, jaws wide to crush him. Then he stepped into the creature's embrace, shoving the grenade directly into its mouth. The creature bit down. Echo kicked me backward, sending me tumbling away across the grass. "Run!" he yelled. Boom! The explosion was wet and final. A cloud of red mist, dirt, and dark fur erupted into the air. The blast knocked me flat on my back, knocking the wind out of me. I looked up, ears ringing. Echo was gone. The Alpha was a headless ruin on the ground, twitching. But the others were climbing over the edge now. 2 more. I scrambled backward, fumbling for a fresh magazine for my pistol. I jammed it in, hands shaking violently. The first one snarled, preparing to pounce. Then a shadow fell over me. Thwop, thwop, thwop. The helicopter rose up from the valley floor behind me, its minigun spinning up. The minigun roared. Brrrr. A stream of lead tore into the cliff edge, churning the earth. The 2 creatures disintegrated under the heavy fire, blown backward off the cliff by the sheer kinetic force. The helicopter touched down, the wind from the rotors flattening the grass. A crew chief waved me in frantically, screaming something I couldn't hear over the engine. I ran. I dove into the cabin, sliding across the metal floor, bruising my ribs. "Go! Go! Go!" the chief yelled into his headset. As we lifted off, banking hard to the right, I crawled to the door. I looked down at the cliff edge one last time. One more creature had climbed up. It stood alone on the precipice, watching us fly away. It didn't roar. It didn't act like a beast. It stood perfectly still, raised one hand, a human gesture, and watched us until we were just a speck in the sky. It felt like a promise. I collapsed against the wall of the chopper, the adrenaline crashing. I was the only one left. I was safe, but I felt dead inside. The flight back to the base was a blur of noise and vibration. I sat staring at my boots, covered in mud and the blood of my friends. I couldn't stop shaking. I held the data drive in my hand. It was the only thing we had saved. 3 good men died for this little piece of plastic. When we landed, the suits were waiting. Men in clean black tactical gear with no insignia. They looked like sharks in human skin. They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't ask about the team. "Do you have the drive?" the lead agent asked, holding out his hand. His voice was devoid of emotion. I looked at him. I wanted to punch him. I wanted to shoot him. But I was exhausted, broken. I handed it over. "Good work," he said, slipping it into a metal case.
Medical is waiting for you. You'll be debriefed, then processed for payment. Your account will receive a significant bonus for the loss of personnel. A bonus. That's what Ox, Echo, and Bishop were worth to them. A line item on a spreadsheet. A bonus. They kept me in a white windowless room for 2 days. They asked me what I saw. I told them the truth, every detail. They didn't blink. They didn't look surprised. Hyenas, the interrogator said, writing in his file without looking up. You were attacked by a rabid hyenas. The stress caused hallucinations. That is the official report. They walked on 2 legs! I slammed my hand on the table. They spoke! They mimicked us! Hyenas, he repeated, closing the folder with a snap. He looked at me with cold, dead eyes. If you repeat that other nonsense, you lose your pension, you lose your clearance, and maybe you have an accident on your way home. Do we understand each other? I understood. I was a loose end. I was an inconvenience. I signed the papers, I took the money, and I walked out of that base a ghost, leaving my life behind me. But I kept something. Before I handed over the drive, while I was alone in the chopper, I had plugged it into my wrist comp. I had made a copy. I'm sitting in a cheap motel room now, halfway across the world. The neon sign outside is buzzing. I have the copy of the drive plugged into my laptop. I finally worked up the courage to open the files. I thought it was a geological survey drone. I thought we were sent to recover data on minerals or oil. I was wrong. The files aren't maps. They're biometrics. The drone wasn't surveying the land. It was tracking them. There are videos, night vision footage from weeks ago. The company knew the creatures were there. They had been feeding them, watching them breed. And then I found the mission file for my team. It wasn't labeled recovery. It was labeled live fire test. They didn't send us in to get the drone. They crashed the drone on purpose to lure us in. We weren't the rescuers. We were the test subjects. They wanted to see how the subject Boltingen would handle a Tier 1 military squad. They recorded everything. The comms, the helmet cams. They watched Ox die. They watched Echo blow himself up. They watched Bishop get dragged away. It was all a test for their new biological weapon. And now they know where I am. I hear a car pulling up outside, heavy boots on the gravel. If you're reading this, don't trust the official story. The monsters aren't just in the jungle. They are in the boardroom, wearing suits, and they are hungry.